Grimora.
The road into Fairhaven was quiet that summer. Too quiet. A place where the air felt heavy, the trees bent toward you as if listening, and even the birds seemed cautious when they sang. Pastor Daniel Moore noticed it the moment his truck rolled across the old wooden bridge into town. The water below was dark, almost black, and still as glass. His wife, Ellen, sat beside him with their youngest daughter asleep in her lap, her head resting against the window. They were moving here for a fresh start. At least that's what the church had promised. Fairhaven was small, remote, and dying. But it had one thing no one could ignore: a church that refused to stay quiet. Mercy Chapel. The town's oldest building, its stone walls dated back to 1882, built by settlers who believed God's voice echoed stronger on that hill. But sometime in the early 1950s, the bell in its tower rang by itself during a funeral service, and every soul inside claimed to have heard something that wasn't a sermon, something that spoke back. The church had been closed for 40 years after that, until now. Daniel had been chosen by the regional diocese to reopen it, restore it, and lead Fairhaven back to faith. A test of strength and devotion. He believed God had sent him there for that reason, but as the sun dipped below the horizon and the steeple came into view, part of him began to wonder if this calling came from somewhere else. Mercy Chapel stood on a lonely hill overlooking the town, a silhouette of rotting wood and cracked stone, its bell tower leaning slightly toward the east as though it were tired of holding secrets. The front gate hung open. Daniel parked the truck beside the overgrown path and stepped out, stretching his legs after the long drive. The crickets were loud, but beneath their song he swore he could hear a faint metallic hum, low, deep, and rhythmic. The bell. He turned to Ellen, who was waking their daughter gently. "We're here," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ellen looked up at the church. "It's beautiful," she said softly, though her voice carried hesitation. "In its own way?" He nodded, forcing a chuckle. "A little cleaning, a little paint, and it'll shine again." But even as he said it, he could feel that strange vibration through the ground. A pulse, faint but constant, as though something beneath the chapel's foundation was alive. They spent the evening unloading what little they owned into the parsonage next to the church, a small 2-story house built from the same stone. It smelled of dust and old books. The previous caretaker had left everything behind, even his Bible, still open on the nightstand to the same page. Ellen noticed it first. Psalm 94, verse 9. "He that planted the ear, shall he not hear? He that formed the eye, shall he not see?" She frowned, closing it gently. Strange verse to leave open. Daniel smiled weakly. Maybe he was listening for something. That night, after tucking their daughter into bed, Daniel stepped outside. The sky was black velvet, no stars, just a faint, milky haze over the moon. The chapel loomed ahead of him. Its heavy oak doors were locked, but through the stained glass windows he could see dust swirling in the candlelight from his lantern. He walked closer. The air grew colder with each step. Then, a sound. Soft, distant, and unmistakable. The bell. A single, slow toll. Not loud, not sharp, but deep. A sound that rolled through his chest like a heartbeat. Daniel froze. He looked up at the tower, his lantern trembling in his hand. The rope inside the belfry swayed gently as if someone had just let go, but there was no wind. He whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Only that low hum returning again, somewhere deep beneath the earth. When he returned to the house, Ellen was standing by the window, her arms crossed. "You heard it too, didn't you, Daniel?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. It could have been the wind. Ellen turned toward him. "Wind doesn't ring bells, Daniel." He exhaled. "Maybe it's loose. Tomorrow I'll climb up there and check." But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that the bell hadn't just rung, it had called. And something had answered. That night, Daniel dreamed of a dark room filled with whispering voices. He couldn't see their faces, but they chanted the same phrase over and over again, a phrase he didn't recognize, but understood all the same. The earth remembers its prayers. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat. The bell tolled again. Once, twice, then silence.
By morning, the dream had left Daniel's hands trembling. He could still hear the bell in his bones, like the vibration hadn't stopped, only settled deeper. Ellen was already in the kitchen, pouring coffee when he came down. The house smelled faintly of dust and something faintly metallic, almost like blood. "You didn't sleep?" she said quietly. He smiled thinly. "Neither did you." Outside, fog rolled down the hill, wrapping the chapel in a pale shroud. Daniel stared through the kitchen window at the bell tower. From here, the spire looked almost crooked, as if it leaned toward them, listening. "I'll go up there," he said. "See what's making that sound." Ellen looked up sharply. "Daniel, it's been locked for years. You don't even know if it's safe." "I can't preach in a church I haven't stepped inside," he replied, reaching for his coat. "If something's wrong, I'll fix it." She didn't stop him, but her hand lingered on the table, tense, white-knuckled, as he walked out into the mist. The chapel's doors groaned when he pushed them open. The hinges screamed, echoing through the nave. Inside, sunlight spilled through fractured stained glass, scattering color across the pews. The air smelled of mildew and forgotten incense. Dust motes danced in the stillness. Beneath it all, Daniel could hear it again, that low hum, faint and buried, like a song played under the earth. He stepped inside. The altar stood at the front, a long marble slab veined with black, the crucifix above it draped in a tattered white cloth. Someone had painted symbols along the base, old, uneven, almost clawed into the stone. They didn't look Christian. Daniel crouched down, brushing his fingers over one. It felt warm to the touch. Behind the altar, a narrow spiral staircase led upward into the bell tower. The steps were damp and crumbling, the air tight and heavy as he climbed. Halfway up, he saw them. Marks. Deep scratches in the stone walls, as if someone had clawed their way down, or tried to hold themselves from being dragged up. His breath quickened. He reached the top and pushed open the hatch. The belfry smelled of rust and rain. The massive bell hung motionless in the center, its bronze surface blackened by time. But something caught his eye. At the base of the bell, encarved into the metal itself, were words. Not in English, not in Latin, something older. And beneath the carvings, small rivulets of red had streaked down the surface, dried into the patina like rusted veins. Daniel leaned closer. The letters seemed to twist when he looked directly at them, as if they were alive. He whispered, "What are you?" The bell moved. A single sway, soft, deliberate. Daniel stumbled backward. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He grabbed the railing, his heart slamming against his ribs. No wind, no hands, but the bell shifted again, heavier this time, like it was breathing. Then the rope, thick and frayed, slid through the pulley by itself, slow and silent. A single toll shattered the stillness. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt. The air shook, dust rained from the ceiling below, the light through the windows fractured. Daniel dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, but it didn't stop the sound. It was inside him now, vibrating through his chest, his skull, his blood. He saw flashes, bodies kneeling in prayer, mouths open but no voices, the earth cracking beneath the altar, hands reaching up from the dirt, grasping at the light, a man in priest robes screaming as he was dragged into the shadows. Then, silence. Daniel gasped for breath. The bell hung perfectly still. He stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling the last few steps, bursting through the doors into daylight. Ellen ran toward him from the parsonage, fear all over her face. "Daniel, what happened?" He stared at her, pale and shaking. It rang, by itself. She looked up at the tower. "No one's supposed to be able to—" Before she could finish, their daughter, Lily, came running out of the house. "Mommy! Daddy!" she cried, clutching a small object in her hand. "It's making noise!" Ellen knelt down. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lily opened her palm. Inside was a tiny brass bell, old, blackened, the clapper missing. But from deep within it came a faint, rhythmic ticking, like a heartbeat. Daniel froze. "Where did you find that?" Lily pointed toward the floorboards of her bedroom. "Under my bed." That night, the house didn't feel the same. Every wall seemed to breathe. Every shadow stretched too far. Daniel sat in the living room staring at the little brass bell on the table. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. But the moment he looked away, he could hear it ringing faintly behind his thoughts. He opened his Bible again, the same one left behind by the old caretaker. He turned to the back cover and found handwriting scrawled there. "The bell doesn't call God, it calls what he buried." Daniel's heart stopped. He looked toward the window. The chapel loomed in the darkness beyond, its tower cutting through the fog. And somewhere out there, faint but certain, the big bell of Mercy Chapel began to toll again. Slow, heavy, endless. Each strike echoed like a warning, or an invitation. The next morning, the fog hadn't lifted. It clung to the ground like smoke, swallowing the road that led out of town. Daniel hadn't slept. He couldn't stop thinking about the words in that Bible. It calls what he buried. He needed answers. Ellen stayed behind with Lily, who was pale and quiet, clutching the little brass bell like it was something precious. She hadn't spoken a word since the night before. Daniel drove into the town square, where the few remaining shops stood half empty. Most windows were boarded up. The only place open was a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. A bell above the door jingled when he stepped inside. The sound made him flinch. An old woman sat in the corner booth, her hair white and thin, a coffee cup trembling in her hands. The waitress leaned over and whispered, "That's Mrs. Harlow. She's the oldest one left from before the closure. She used to live next to the chapel."
Daniel walked over slowly. "Mrs. Harlow?" She looked up, eyes cloudy but sharp. "You're the new preacher." "Yes, ma'am, Daniel. I just moved into the parsonage. I wanted to ask you about the chapel." Her lips pressed thin. "You shouldn't have gone inside." Daniel's stomach tightened. "You know about the bell, don't you?" She set her cup down. "Everyone in this town knows. That's why nobody stays." He leaned forward. "Please, tell me." Mrs. Harlow looked past him toward the window, the fog outside pressing against the glass like a living thing. Mercy Chapel was built in 1859, before the town even had a name. The land wasn't meant for it. The ground was soft, unstable. They said the builder found bones while digging, thought they were animal bones, but they weren't. Daniel's breath caught. "Human?" She nodded slowly. "A family, found buried in a circle, hands bound. The priest who built the chapel, Father Alden, he ignored it, said consecration would cleanse the ground, but he was wrong. Every sermon, the bell rang louder. Every night, the congregation heard voices through the walls." "What happened to him?" Daniel asked quietly. Her eyes went distant. "One morning they found the church empty, pews overturned, blood on the altar, and Father Alden gone. They never found his body, just the bell swinging on its own." Daniel's throat grew dry. "The caretaker's Bible. There's a line written inside. It calls what he buried. Do you know what that means?" Mrs. Harlow reached for his hand. Her skin was paper thin, her grip surprisingly firm. "It means the bell doesn't just summon the faithful, Reverend. It calls to the ones still buried beneath that chapel. And once you've heard it, they know your name." Daniel froze. "Who are they?" She looked directly into his eyes, her voice trembling. "They're the ones Father Alden tried to hide from God, the ones who answered when the bell tolled first. Don't let it ring again." When Daniel drove back home, the fog seemed thicker. The trees lining the road leaned inward, branches skeletal and tangled like arms reaching for him. But as he turned onto the chapel's dirt lane, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Lily, standing alone by the chapel doors. He slammed the brakes and jumped out, calling her name. "Lily, what are you doing here?" She turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes distant. In her hand was the small brass bell. "It wanted me to come," she whispered. Daniel's heart dropped. He rushed forward, grabbing her shoulders. "No, baby, listen to me. You can't come here alone. Do you understand?" She didn't answer. Her gaze shifted past him to the tower. "The big one is calling again." He turned and froze. Up in the belfry, the rope was moving. Slow, deliberate. The bell was swaying. Daniel scooped Lily into his arms and ran back toward the house, shouting for Ellen. But when he looked over his shoulder, the chapel doors had swung open. Inside, faint candlelight flickered. Someone, or something, was standing in the doorway. A silhouette, tall and cloaked, motionless. And as the bell tolled again, Daniel realized something horrifying. The sound wasn't coming from the tower anymore. It was coming from under the ground.
That night, Daniel couldn't stop pacing. He could hear faint thuds beneath the floorboards of the parsonage, like something shifting beneath the earth. Ellen sat on the couch, holding Lily close, whispering prayers that broke every few words. Then came the knock. 3 slow, hollow taps on the front door. Daniel grabbed the nearest object, an old iron candle holder, and opened the door. No one, only fog. But as he stepped outside, he noticed something half buried in the dirt near the porch steps. A small wooden cross, freshly dug into the soil, and carved on it, with something sharp, was a name: Daniel Whitmore.
Daniel couldn't sleep that night, not after what he saw carved into that cross. His name, freshly etched. He stayed awake until the first pale light crept over the fog-drenched hills. The town was silent, the air colder than it should have been. Ellen refused to let Lily out of her sight, keeping her upstairs with the curtains drawn. But Daniel couldn't sit still. He had to know what was beneath that church. By sunrise, he grabbed his lantern, crowbar, and Bible, and walked toward Mercy Chapel. The fog parted around him like breath, swirling low across the gravestones behind the building. The bell tower loomed overhead, its black iron bell motionless for now. But the silence around it felt heavier than before, as if the air itself was listening. The chapel doors groaned when he pushed them open. Inside, the scent of mildew and rot filled his lungs. The pews were covered in a thick film of dust. On the altar lay a cracked leather-bound journal. It wasn't there before. He picked it up. The first page bore a name scrawled in ink: Father Alden Crane, 1860. He flipped through. The pages were brittle, but the handwriting grew more frantic with each entry. March 5th. They say the ground beneath this place moves when the bell rings. I hear voices in the stones at night. March 12th. A family buried here before consecration. Their eyes still open. I see them in dreams. April 2nd. I sealed the tunnels below. They must never be opened. The bell is their mouth. It speaks when the ground breathes. Daniel's hands trembled. There was a folded note tucked between the last 2 pages. He opened it. A hand-drawn map of the chapel, with a small mark beneath the altar. A trap door. He moved to the altar and pushed it aside. The floor beneath was uneven stone, but one section looked newer. A wooden plank, nailed shut. He pried it open. A gust of air rushed up, cold and damp, carrying a faint metallic smell. Blood, old and iron-thick. He lifted the lantern and peered down. Stone steps descended into darkness. Every instinct told him to turn back, but something deeper, some desperate need to understand, pulled him forward. The air grew colder the deeper he went. His breath fogged the lantern glass. After maybe 20 steps, he reached a narrow corridor cut from earth and stone. The walls were slick with moisture, carved symbols running along them, faint crosses and strange looping sigils that didn't look entirely Christian. He followed the tunnel's curve until it opened into a small crypt. 6 stone coffins stood in a circle, each one marked with the same name: Alden. Father Alden's name, over and over. He stepped closer and saw that only one coffin had been opened. Inside lay bones twisted unnaturally, the skull cracked open as if by great force from within. And at the center of the crypt, an iron bell, small, blackened, and half buried in the dirt. It wasn't the chapel bell. It was older, smaller, and wrong. The metal pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing. Daniel knelt beside it. The inscription around its base read, "He that buries sin must wring it clean." He reached out, hand trembling. The surface was ice cold. Then, a whisper. Not from the tunnel behind him, from the bell itself. "Daniel." He jerked back, hitting the wall. The sound echoed faintly, and then stopped. He stared at the bell. The air around it began to shimmer, and shapes flickered in the shadows. Faces, half-formed, mouths open in silent screams. And above them, a man, dressed in tattered priest's robes, his head tilted sharply to one side. Father Alden. "Why have you come?" the figure whispered, voice echoing like metal dragged across stone. Daniel stammered, I came to understand, to make it right." Alden's head straightened, his hollow eyes glowing faintly red. "There is no right, only the toll. The ground remembers every prayer we forced upon it. Every soul buried beneath these stones still waits for their amens." "What are they?" Daniel whispered. Alden tilted his head. "The forgiven, the forgotten, the ones I sealed. You will join them." The bell behind him began to vibrate. A low hum rised through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling. Daniel turned and ran, clutching the lantern as the tunnel walls seemed to breathe. Faces pressed outward through the earth. Human faces, mouths open, whispering his name. He stumbled up the stairs, slammed the trapdoor shut, and collapsed on the chapel floor, gasping. The bell above, the large one in the tower, began to ring. 1, 2, 3 times. Ellen's scream echoed from a house outside. Daniel bolted through the fog toward the parsonage. The door was open wide. The curtains whipped in the wind. Inside, Ellen was crouched near the stairs, holding Lily close. "Daniel!" she cried. She was talking in her sleep, saying the same words over and over." He grabbed her shoulders. "What words?" Ellen's lips trembled. "He that buries sin must wring it clean." Daniel's stomach turned. No, that's..." A loud bang cut him off. From upstairs. They both froze. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming down the hall. Lily whispered, "It's him! The man from the bell!" The sound grew closer. A shadow passed the top of the staircase. And then the voice. Low. Hollow. And too close. "Daniel."
Daniel stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the dark. That voice wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't the wind. It came from the same voice that whispered his name in the crypt beneath the chapel. "Daniel," it said again, softer now, almost kind. Lily gripped her mother's arm, her tiny voice cracked. "Daddy, that's not you, is it?" Ellen pressed a trembling finger to her lips. "Don't move," she whispered. The floorboards upstairs creaked, slow steps, one after another. Something was walking in their daughter's room. Daniel's mind raced. He had to protect them. But as he took a step toward the staircase, the air turned heavy, thick, charged with a strange vibration that pulsed through his bones. Then came the sound, a faint, distant toll. The bell. It wasn't from the chapel this time. It came from the walls, from the floor beneath their feet. Daniel's ears rang. Ellen screamed. Lily covered her face and started sobbing. And from upstairs came a voice, Lily's voice. "Mommy, I'm here!" Ellen's head snapped up. "Lily?" She looked down. Her daughter was right beside her, crying. "Mommy, that's not me," Lily whispered, trembling. "She said she wants to see Daddy." Daniel's blood turned to ice. He climbed the stairs slowly, each creak echoing through the house. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, shadows twisting and stretching along the wallpaper. Lily's bedroom door was open. Inside, the window was shut tight, but the curtains moved as if something had just slipped through them. The air smelled like damp earth. On the bed lay the brass bell, Lily's toy, only now it was covered in a thin film of soil. And next to it, carved into the headboard with something sharp, were the words, "Ring it clean." Daniel backed away, heart pounding, but then the door slammed shut behind him. He spun around, pounding his fists against it. "Ellen, get Lily out of the house, now!" The light flickered. For a moment, everything went completely dark. When the bulb came back on, the room wasn't the same. The wallpaper had peeled away. The floorboards looked old and rotted, black with mold. The window was gone, replaced by solid stone. And standing in the corner was Father Alden. Only this time, Daniel could see his face clearly. His eyes were gone. His mouth was a dark hole stretched too wide, the skin cracked and bleeding, and from that hole came the tolling sound, deep, metallic, like the echo of the bell inside his throat. Daniel fell back, gasping, "Stay away from me!" Alden tilted his head. "You woke them, Daniel. The ground remembers what you promised to keep buried." "I didn't do anything!" Alden stepped closer. The lantern light flickered, shadows clawing across the walls. "You dug where you shouldn't. You read what you shouldn't. You called their names." Daniel's knees hit the bed frame. "What do you want from me?" The priest's face twisted into a grotesque grin. "Your voice. It's not enough for one bell to ring." The room shuddered. The sound of the great chapel bell erupted outside, shaking the windows. Ellen screamed from below. Daniel turned toward the door. It flung open on its own. The hallway had changed. It wasn't the parsonage anymore. It was the chapel's nave, stretching endlessly, candles burning along the pews. He ran, stumbling between rows of wooden seats. The air reeked of smoke and decay. The bell tolled again, closer now. And then he saw them. Dozens of shadowy figures seated in the pews. Some turned their heads toward him. Some didn't have faces at all. Every toll of the bell made their heads jerk in unison, like puppets on invisible strings. Daniel stumbled to the altar. The floor beneath it began to crack, light bleeding through. A voice rose from the earth. "You must finish the prayer." He shook his head violently. "No, whatever this is, I won't." The bell roared again. The pews caught fire. The faceless congregation wailed as smoke filled the chapel.
The sound became deafening, metal screaming, wood cracking, whispers blending into one long cry for help. Daniel covered his ears, shouting, "God, help me!" And then, silence. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the floor of his bedroom. The sun was rising through the window. Ellen was beside him, holding his hand, tears streaking her face. "You were gone all night," she whispered. He blinked, disoriented. "Gone? Where?" She pointed toward the church. "I saw you in the tower. The bell was ringing." He looked out the window. The chapel door was open again, swaying gently in the morning breeze. The bell tower stood still now, silent, but he could see something on the front steps, a fresh wooden cross, and carved into it this time was a different name, Ellen Whitmore.
Daniel stared at the wooden cross from the window, the name carved deep and jagged. Ellen Whitmore. His wife's name. He didn't realize he was whispering until Ellen touched his shoulder. "Daniel, what is it?" He turned slowly, his voice breaking. "It knows your name now." Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The cross outside the chapel!" Ellen moved toward the window, but Daniel stopped her. "Don't look," he said quickly, gripping her arm too tight. "Every time it carves a name, it takes one of us closer." She pulled away, fear in her eyes. "Closer to what?" Daniel swallowed hard. "To the ground." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Ellen tried to pack a few bags. Daniel said nothing, staring out at the chapel, its black steeple cutting into the sky. The fog didn't lift, not once. Every few hours, Daniel swore he could hear faint tolls beneath the wind, like the sound was traveling up through the soil rather than the air. That evening, Lily was sitting by the window with her bell. She hadn't spoken all day. When Daniel knelt beside her, he looked at him and whispered, "Daddy, the people under the church want to come home." His heart stopped. "What people, Lily?" She tilted her head, her voice suddenly distant. "The ones the priest buried. They said it hurts when the big bell rings. They said you can help." Daniel's mouth dry hard. "How can I help?" She blinked slowly. "They said one must ring for all." And then she smiled. Not the warm, innocent smile of his little girl, but a cold, knowing one. Before he could respond, the house lights flickered. The air turned electric, humming with a deep vibration that rattled the glass panes. The bell began to toll again. Slow, deep, endless. The sound rolled through the valley, making the earth tremble beneath them. Ellen screamed, grabbing Lily, but the little girl didn't move. She was staring straight ahead at the door. "It's here," she whispered. The front door creaked open on its own. Fog poured inside, thick and black, crawling along the floor like smoke. A figure stood just beyond the threshold, tall, cloaked in shadow, its head tilted in the same unnatural way Daniel had seen before. Father Alden. Daniel stepped in front of his family. "Stay behind me." Alden's voice slid through the fog like oil. "Daniel Whitmore, you have heard the toll. The ground knows your faith is thin. The prayer remains unfinished." Daniel's voice cracked. "What prayer?" "The one that seals what God refused to forgive." The priest lifted his arm. His sleeve fell back, revealing bones instead of flesh. In his skeletal hand, he held the small iron bell from the crypt. It was glowing faintly red now. Alden said, "You rang this once. You called the names.
Now finish it, or they will." Daniel shook his head. "No. You want me to become like you?" Alden smiled faintly, the sound of grinding metal echoing from his mouth. "You already have." He pointed toward the chapel. "Come." And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the fog swallowed him. The tolling stopped. Daniel knew what he had to do. He turned to Ellen, who was sobbing quietly, clutching Lily tight. "Take her and go. Leave town. Don't look back." Ellen shook her head violently. "I'm not leaving you here!" He cupped her face, forcing a trembling smile. "If that bell rings again, it won't stop until it takes all of us. Please, take Lily and drive until you can't see this place anymore." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Daniel, please!" He kissed her forehead, then whispered, "I'll come find you." He knew it was a lie. The chapel doors groaned open before he even touched them. Inside, candles had been lit, hundreds of them, lining the aisles, the pews, even the altar steps. Shadows danced along the walls, forming shapes that moved and breathed. The large bell in the tower above began to sway, though the rope lay still. Dust rained down from the rafters. And then came the whispering. Hundreds of voices, layered and undistinct, all chanting the same line, over and over. "He that buries sin must wring it clean." Daniel stepped toward the altar. The trap door was open again, waiting. He climbed down into the dark, the lantern's flame flickering wildly. The crypt looked different now. The 6 stone coffins had shattered. The air was filled with a deep rhythmic sound, like breathing through the earth. The iron bell sat in the center, pulsing faintly red. Father Oldham was kneeling beside it. He turned, smiling. "The living always think they can silence the past. You of all men should know better." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "What did you do to this place?" Alden's voice echoed through the chamber. "I buried my sins beneath the altar, as God commanded. But I buried too much. When the earth began to answer, I sealed it with the sound of repentance. I gave it the bell." He stood, his hollow eyes burning red. "You rang it again, Daniel. You called them awake. And now the bell wants a voice. Yours." Daniel shook his head. "No! Then it will take your family instead." The ground beneath them split open. A horrible wailing filled the crypt. Pale hands reached out from the soil, dozens of them, grasping, clawing, pulling themselves free. Daniel grabbed the iron bell. It burned his palms, but he lifted it anyway. "If it wants a voice, it can have mine." Alden's smile widened. "Then ring it clean." Daniel raised the bell and struck it against the stone. The sound was deafening. A surge of heat and light burst through the chamber. The hands froze mid-reach, the earth trembling violently. He rang it again and again. With each toll, his vision blurred, his skin burning where the metal touched. Shadows screamed, faces melted back into the dirt. Father Alden fell to his knees, howling in rage. "You can't purify what was born of sin!" Daniel shouted above the chaos. "Then I'll die trying." He rang the bell one last time. The sound exploded through the chapel above, shattering glass, splitting wood. The tower collapsed in a thunderous crash. Then, silence. Dust and ash drifted through the air. The fog outside lifted for the first time in decades. Ellen, standing far down the road with Lily in her arms, saw the hill glowing faintly with orange light. Then the glow faded, leaving only smoke rising where the chapel once stood. She waited until morning to climb back up the hill. The chapel was gone, reduced to rubble and stone. In the ashes near where the altar once stood, she found Daniel's Bible. The pages were burned, but one verse was still visible, the same he had seen on the caretaker's nightstand when they first arrived. He that planted the ear, shall he not hear? He that formed the eye, shall he not see? Ellen pressed the Bible to her chest and whispered, "He heard you." Then she turned, taking Lily by the hand, and as they walked away, the wind stirred through the debris. Under it, for just a moment, the faintest sound echoed. One last toll.
22 years later. The town of Fairhaven no longer existed on most maps. The road that once led through it had been repaved and rerouted, swallowing the hill where Mercy Chapel once stood. But to those who remembered, the few who ever dared to speak its name, they said the earth still whispered when it rained. Lily Whitmore had tried for most of her life to forget. Her mother had passed away 3 winters ago, leaving behind a single box of old letters, a cracked silver locket, and a folded newspaper clipping that had yellowed with age. The headline read, "Chapel Collapse Claims Local Historian." Daniel Whitmore's name was the only one listed. But what made Lily's hands tremble wasn't the story, it was the photograph. Behind her father, in that faded picture, rising in the distance through a veil of fog, was the bell tower, still standing. Lily drove through the night. The highway was almost empty, the hum of tires filling the silence between her thoughts. The landscape around her grew more familiar as the miles rolled by. The crooked pines, the winding slope, the faint outline of the ridge that had once looked down upon Fairhaven. She stopped where the pavement ended. The fog came down heavy, swallowing the world in gray. She parked and stepped out, the air cold and damp against her skin. Where the chapel once stood, there was now nothing but grass and broken stones, half swallowed by moss. And yet the air felt alive. Every breath carried a low vibration, like the sound of something breathing beneath the ground. She stood in silence, clutching the silver locket her mother had left her. Inside was a faded photo, Daniel, Ellen, and baby Lily standing before the old chapel. Behind them, barely visible, hung the small iron bell. She turned toward the ridge. That's when she saw it. Half buried in the soil, just beyond the line of trees, a fragment of blackened metal, curved, heavy, ancient. The bell. She knelt, brushing away the dirt. The metal was cold at first, then warm, pulsing faintly beneath her fingers. When she looked closer, she realized something horrifying. The cracks along its surface weren't cracks at all. They were veins. She stumbled backward, her breath quickening. "Dad?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the air seemed to thicken in response. The wind stilled, the forest went silent. Then, the faintest echo answered her. "Lily." She froze. It was her father's voice. "Dad?" she called again, trembling. "Lily," the voice came again, softer now. "You shouldn't have come." The fog thickened, swirling around her like smoke. She could barely see a few feet ahead. The shape of the bell seemed to twist in the mist, growing taller, wider.
until it wasn't the bell anymore. It was a doorway, and beyond it, she saw light. She stepped closer, unable to stop herself. Inside the light, she saw flashes, memories she didn't recognize. Her father kneeling in the crypt, the bell ringing, his body dissolving in a blaze of white fire. The souls beneath the church rising, their faces twisted with pain and gratitude both. And behind them, the shadow of Father Alden, screaming as he was dragged into the soil. Then, darkness. The light pulsed once, and she heard the bell again, not from above, but within her chest. It was slow, deep, measured. With every toll, her heartbeat followed. She fell to her knees, clutching her head. "Stop it, please!" The ground opened beneath her palms. Black soil spilled away, revealing bones tangled together, hundreds of them. Their hollow eye sockets turned toward her. A whisper crawled through the wind. "He that buried us rings within you." She screamed. She grabbed the bell shard and hurled it, but it didn't move. It was fused to the ground now, humming like a heartbeat. Her father's voice came again, closer this time. "Lily, listen to me." The fog parted. Daniel stood before her. He looked the same as the day he'd vanished, pale, streaked with ash, his eyes glowing faintly with that red ember light. "Dad," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "How are you?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm not anymore." "Why did you bring me here?" she cried. "I didn't. The bell did. It's still alive, bound to the sound of our name." She trembled, her hands shaking. "How do I stop it?" Daniel's eyes softened. "You can't, but you can quiet it." "How?" He reached out his hand. His touch was cold, like marble. "You must ring it one last time, not for forgiveness, but for release." She hesitated. "If I do, will it take me?" He smiled faintly, the same weary, loving smile she remembered from her childhood. "Some things must end in silence, Lily. Even us." She took the iron bell fragment in her hands. The hum inside it grew stronger, almost like a pulse syncing with her heartbeat. She raised it slowly, her tears blurring her vision. "I love you, Dad." His form began to fade, his voice whispering, "And I love you, always." The moment the bell struck the stone, the world ignited in sound. Not a scream, not a cry, but a deep, beautiful resonance that filled the valley. The fog lifted instantly. The bones crumbled to dust. The air grew still. And when the last echo faded, the ground sealed itself again. Weeks later, a construction crew clearing the old ridge found the single bell fragment lying on the grass. They said it hummed faintly when touched, like it was singing under the skin. The piece was moved to the Fairhaven Historical Archive, displayed behind glass. Every night, when the lights went out, the security cameras recorded the same thing: a faint mist rising near the case, and a soft, rhythmic sound, barely audible. One deep toll. And somewhere beyond what eyes can see, Daniel and Lily stood together at the edge of an endless field of light, where no bells rang and no shadows lingered. The curse had ended, but the sound of its silence would echo forever.